Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm Nerd Nook for our second Permaculture Design Chalk Talk. And in this one, we're going to jump off of what we discussed in the first one, what nutrients are, and which ones were primarily gas phase versus primarily mineral phase. If you haven't watched that first one, if you just came in and found this one in search, I will put a link up at the top of the screen so you can go pause this one, watch that one, and then come back. But we want to talk about source sink flow and how nutrients move across the landscape. Okay? So that's your first definition. Source sink flow is how nutrients move across the landscape in short. These are short definitions. I know that there is more to all of these, but we're simplifying here quite a bit. Now, the next definition we need in here is biogeochemistry. Okay? Big long word, biogeochemistry. Okay? And if you break this down into its three components, you get its meaning. Okay? And biogeochemistry describes processes that are dictated Okay, sorry for the hiccup. The battery died, so I finished writing my words. Biogeochemistry, this describes processes driven by all three. Is that spelled right? Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yes. Driven by all three factors at the same time. So you have biological factors, chemical factors, and geological factors, all driving one thing, all interacting with each other mutually. And you cannot see that thing without looking at the driving forces from all three directions. Okay? We're going to see how that factors into nutrient cycling here very quickly. The second definition that I need to give you is ecosystem services. An ecosystem service is a function performed by an organism which alters the overall ecosystem structure and function. Okay? A function performed by a specific organism which alters the overall ecosystem structure and function. We're going to bump into that here very quickly too. And both of these are going to be consistent themes that you will see crop up in all of these talks. Okay? So kind of the classic example of an ecosystem service is the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone. How that changed herbivore behavior, and that change in herbivore behavior changed the structure of the forest. The structure of the forest changed the population of beavers. The population of beavers changed the shape of the rivers, right? So you add or delete wolves, you change how the rivers flow through Yellowstone Park, right? All of those things are interwoven ecosystem services. And it's just a really great example of how profound these ecosystem services can be. Okay? Now, again, both of these are simplified definitions. If this was a full-length college course, you would probably be spending entire days, if not entire weeks, on each of those definitions. Right? So we're simplifying. This is just kind of the nut meat of it, and enough for what we need here today. So what we want to do is we want to look at source sink flow, biogeochemistry, ecosystem services, and how those three things impact the origination and flow of nutrients through a landscape. So we need to draw a landscape volcano. We have a subducting plate. We have an ocean. Okay. And we have a continental crust. So, let's look at how these work if we delete the biology. Okay? The simplest possible form. Remember from the last little chalk talk that the majority of the nutrients that we're looking at, in terms of numbers, not in terms of mass that goes into a plant, but in terms of, numbers of elements involved, come from mineral sources. Where do minerals come from? Minerals come from volcanoes, basically, right? That's the volcanoes give birth to continents. Continents are full of minerals. Now, natural chemical weathering. So here we have geology in the volcano. We have chemistry in the weathering. You still have water. You still have ultraviolet light coming in. You still have wind. And you have oxidation reactions happening between those things. Okay, oxidation reduction reactions happening between those things. So the nutrients that are spewed out by this volcano are going to erode, be released, and flow with water across the landscape. Okay? So let's make, what color is a nutrient? We'll make a nutrient red. Right? So we have some red nutrients here in this, in that bit of rock. And then we have some chemical weathering, and it's going to cause some of it to percolate through the bulk medium and some of it to just run off across through river systems. Okay? Now, what's going to happen? Those rivers eventually reach the ocean. Okay? Those minerals will be released into the seawater, will sink, and then will be taken down for recycling over geologic time. So if we think on a 1,000 to million year time scale, we have the volcano as the source, we have the ocean floor as the sink. With everything moving across the landscape through chemical weathering and water erosion, primarily, yes, wind erosion too, but mostly chemical weathering and water erosion, moving to the ocean, and then all of this stuff coming down to the bottom of the seafloor. Okay? So on a 1,000 to million year time scale, the volcano is a true source, the ocean is a true sink. Because once they hit the seafloor bed, they're not coming back up. So sink is where you lose the nutrient sources where they come from. Now, over, hundreds of millions of years to billions of years, this turns into a full cycle. Because the seafloor is subducted, that subduction carries water with it. The water helps magma form and melt, which produces more volcanoes, and we re-release those nutrients up to the top. That's the geology part of this. So this is the geochemistry side of this. And if that's all you have, that's all you have. Right? But now when we insert biology, the mere fact that we inserted biology gives us ecosystem services, and those ecosystem services give us a lot more going on. Okay? So let's draw some green stuff. Right? We'll just draw a patch of grass here. Okay? We've got some green stuff. Well, this green stuff also has some roots coming down. Okay? So now, this water has eroded some nutrients right into the root zone of the plant, which are going to be taken up to make those leaves. Okay? So now, every unit of nutrients that the plant absorbed are no longer running off across the landscape. They're incorporated into the plant leaves. When those plant leaves die, they're released back into the soil, but it takes time for them to decompose. And that time that it takes for them to decompose is going to allow time for another plant to suck them back up. Okay? So this is the first ecosystem service that we want to talk about, is the function of plants. First off, the roots retain soil. Okay? It's not an accident that in geological terms, the evolution of land animals is a blink of an eye following the evolution of land plants. Right? You have whole bunches of stuff in the soil, but nothing on land, in the ocean, but you have no soil on land until you have plants. Once you have plants, you have soil, you have the ecosystem functions of delaying nutrient flow, and almost immediately you get land animals at that same junction. Okay? This is a crucial ecosystem service. Right? Now, this slows the erosion. It does not stop the erosion. So we still end up with nutrients reaching the ocean. But let's say maybe we had 4 arrows worth of speed in eroding nutrients off of the land before we get to plants. Once we have the ecosystem service, maybe now we only have 1 arrow worth of erosion into the ocean. So it has dramatically slowed the process. Okay? But now, let's look at what else is going on. Well, we don't just, as I said, we don't just have plants. We have happy critters eating those plants. Okay? And as we know about feeding animals, what goes in must come out. So we have those happy animals pooing those plants. What ecosystem service is this? Well, we have the animal taking the nutrients which were removed from the erosive potential of the water moving across the landscape, move them into the leaves. Now this animal eats them and spreads them out. Okay? Second ecosystem service. The land needs its animals. The animals spread out these nutrient concentrations that the plants are creating. Okay? What else happens? Well, once we get to the ocean, algae are going to consume these nutrients, and then algae are going to be eaten by fish. Okay? So that means that in the absence of any sort of life in the ocean, you just simply have this geochemical loop. But now, just like the plants and the animals on land are slowing the movement of nutrients from source to sink, the algae is going to absorb some of those nutrients and slow the flow down to the ocean bottom. Not stop it, but slow it. And then we add fish into the mix. The fish, just like our deer up here, is further slowing and spreading the nutrients. The fish are going to further slow the loss of nutrients from the system and spread them out across the ocean. They're going to do something else crucial, and that is migration. Okay? So think about the migration of fish. Salmon, shad, striped bass, eel, all of these fish would migrate back and forth between continental rivers and ocean water. Well, they are taking these nutrients, which had eroded all the way out to the ocean, and providing the ecosystem service of shipping them back up on land. Pacific salmon, 100% die every migration. Where do those nutrients go? Into the bellies of animals and across the landscape. Okay? The shad and Atlantic salmon and steelhead, they don't all die, but about a third of them die in every given migration. Where does the nutrients in those third go? Into the bellies of animals and across the landscape. Okay? So if you look in a time period before we destroyed our river systems, you have the ecosystem service of these fish swimming the nutrients back up. Again, reversing the source sink flow. Now the ocean is not just a sink, it's a source. You look at the east coast of North America, we also had the passenger pigeon. They would be attracted to nutrient-rich environments that were producing a lot of fruiting plants go just absolutely decimate those fruits and then fly somewhere else. Again, what goes in must come out, so they're spreading those nutrients across the landscape. Before their extinction, that was a crucially important ecosystem service. And this reverses the source sink flow of these mineral nutrients. Okay? So, what else do we have? Well, if we go back to algae and we think about single-celled organisms, now in terms of weathering, we have biological weathering. Is the function of a bacteria or a fungus using enzymes to break down the rocks faster. A lot of these things end up existing in symbiotic relationships with each other, and you end up with a system where we aren't just having chemical weathering trying to wash things in the ocean, but when a fungus blasts apart a rock surface with its peroxidase activity and liberates nutrients, it's immediately taking them up. And it's taking them up into a network of hyphae which cross the landscape and distribute those nutrients. So again, the nutrients being liberated aren't being liberated by an erosive process, they're being liberated by an ecosystem service, which is immediately scarfing them up and contributing to this flow of nutrients, the cyclical flow of nutrients in the biological system. Right, so we're not just capturing them away from the erosive process, we're liberating them in a way which is initially not even part of the erosive process. And further slowing this source sink flow off of the continent into the oceans. And the more we can slow that, the happier we are. This is where we get into the take-home portion of this little chalk talk. Obviously, this is a whole landscape, and your property is not even visible on this map. Okay? So we're thinking about smaller scale here. But still, if you look at what's going on, the more that we can slow the source sink flow of nutrients off the continent into the ocean, the better, because we don't want to wait a couple 100 million years in order for them to be spit out back by a volcano. We want to keep them on our property. How do we do that? We do that by making sure that our property is permanently covered in a diversity of organisms which are going to provide these ecosystem services. You don't want your agricultural enterprise to simply be mining with plants, right? And that's what it comes down to. If you're leaving your soil bare for an extended period of time on any extensive area, yes, it's fine to have some small gardens that are bare a little bit. It's still better if you cover crop them. But you're not going to destroy your property with a raised bed that you didn't quite get to cover cropping, right? You know, perspective is a thing, nuance is a thing. So, but as a broad principle, you want to keep something green on the ground at all times so that we can keep this a cycle instead of a source sink linear flow. Okay? And as a take home, the land needs its animals. Anything that is going to move farther than a plant and where it drops its leaves is going to be moved by an animal. If you can incorporate animals into your landscape, whether that be attracting wild ones or having domestics, it's to your advantage because they will do the moving for you. And the third take home is any ecosystem service that we delete from our environment, whether that's small scale or large scale, once you've eliminated that ecosystem service, you then have to do work to take up the slack. So if you don't have plants capturing these nutrients and they just run off, you're going to then have to work, earn money, and buy fertilizer, whether that's chemical or organic, that's up to you, But you're going to have to spend your time to earn money and your money on fertilizer to get them back. If you keep things green, you don't lose them. If you don't have animals on your property that are performing ecosystem services for you, whether that be eating bugs off your plants or eating grass in one paddock and pooing it in another, you're then going to have to do that job. So in choosing to remove life from your land, you are choosing to add more work to your schedule. And that is a key take home. The third is that the cycle of mineral nutrients does tend to be linear on human timescales, unless it's interrupted by some living thing, which we want to do. Okay? The cycle of nutrients which have a gas phase component is not nearly as linear on human timescales. It's all a cycle on geologic time, but on human timescales, the mineral nutrients tend to be linear. Okay? So, we will conclude that there, and we will talk about the nutrients which do have a gas phase to their biogeochemical cycle in the next Chalk Talk. I will see you then.